started. Welcome everybody to HITRUST Secrets, and we're joined today with Matt Berther, who's going to talk about, after the celebration. And I know Ryan Patrick last week had talked about that. Day one when you get your HITRUST certification, celebrate. Day two, recover from that celebration, and day three, get back to work. And so that's really what follows onto this conversation is Matt being able to say, yeah, here's how you get back to work, so that you can make sure you don't run into the sophomore curse of not being able to do it again, because you've proven you can do it once, but you're still with high trust always, it's a moving target, because 2 years later or a year later when you're looking to start again, how exactly are you going to make sure that what's changed in your environment, what's changed as far as high trust controls, and moving on from there. Matt, take it away.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Matt Berther. I have completed high trust assessments since 2014, and it is absolutely my privilege to be able to join you today to talk about what happens after the celebration confetti falls, or in other words, how do you turn the certification into a repeatable, low drama program? I know we have an hour together today. This portion of the time will take about 20 minutes or so, and then after that, I'd welcome the opportunity to transition into a free-form discussion. So to start with a tiny bit of background, over the past 2 decades, I've worn many technology hats, from software engineer to early DevOps adopter to a solutions architect and a compliance leader. Um, my LinkedIn happens to be on the slide here if you feel inclined to connect. I've also included a QR code for those that are comfortable scanning a random QR code. Again, since 2014, I focused full time on compliance and security. First, as a director of engineering, where I was rolling out CI, CD, and high trust readiness. Then, as a security architect and a compliance lead, embedding controls into our cloud migrations. And most recently, I served at the executive leadership level, where I oversaw an organization's entire security, privacy, and third-party risk programs. Now, when we completed our first high trust assessment back in 2014, uh, and for those that know, it was only the R2 assessments back then. So they were very involved, intense assessments. But when we did that, we covered only our production segment. But that said, we found so much value in it that over the years we ended up expanding the scope. When I left there, our corporate workstations, our corporate network, our corporate infrastructure, you name it, we had it in scope. And every expansion of that scope really did teach me a new lesson about sustaining these controls at scale. And so today I'm hoping to share how my breadth of software, cloud, and security ops experience really shaped a system for helping to keep your high trust program running smoothly long after the confetti falls. So, congratulations, you made it, right? We all love that moment when we get the certified email, right? There's confetti everywhere. But now what? What if your next audit arrives and you're starting from scratch? Does that sound familiar to anybody? And so my question here is how do you keep the controls and your sanity intact? And some of the common failure modes that I have seen in my time are ownership confusion. And this looks like something like the network team thought that AppSec would rotate the encryption keys after the certification. AppSec assumed that the operations team would, and so the keys went unrotated for 6 months. We have evidence rot where the vulnerability scans were exported, but they were only retained for 30 days. And so when the auditors arrived, the last logs were 6 weeks old, and we had no proof of current patch status. Um, if it's not scheduled, it doesn't happen. If you're planning quarterly user access reviews, but never schedule them, 9 months can slip by before anyone realizes that stale accounts are still active. And sometimes an over reliance on consultants looks like bringing them in just a couple weeks before the audit, but internal teams had no process, so the controls weren't really tested until the consultants, the assessors, forced to scramble. But what if instead we used high trust not as a compliance checklist, but really as a way to measure risk? Every control is telling you something about your security posture. And what if we treated it, and what if we treated the CSF like a dashboard instead of a clipboard? And you can think of each of the CSF controls as a data point on your security dashboard. Green is good, amber means that you need some attention, and red means urgent. If you stop seeing high trust as that static checklist and you start using it as a live risk monitoring tool, you know your organization knows exactly where to invest the time and the budget long before the audit season. And so a concrete example from my background here, let's take the daily signature update control for malicious code protection. On a dashboard, it might look like this. You have green, where 115 of your 120 endpoints have been updated within the last 24 hours. Four of the 120 have been updated in the last between 48 and 72 hours. And red, you have one endpoint that hasn't updated in over a week. And so that single data point tells you everything you need. Most of the estate's healthy. You've got a couple of servers that need attention, and one device is posing an immediate risk for you. And rather than waiting for the audit season to discover the gaps, you're watching these signals in real time, and you can dispatch the fixes before the malware or the audit season hits. And that is how you preempt audit surprises. Projects are sprints, right? You cross a finish line, you pause, you take some deep breaths. A program, on the other hand, is more like a marathon. The controls live and breathe and evolve over the long term. Getting high trust certified the first time is hard. There is no question about it. But the kicker in my mind, the second time, it can be even harder unless you shift your thinking. Again, I think a lot of organizations do treat certification like a one-time sprint, but it's not a project, it's a program. And if you're treating it like a project, a sprint to the summit, you'll celebrate, you'll watch the evidence and the processes go stale. But instead, if you flip to a program mindset, you build a marathon grade engine that continuously maintains those controls. It refreshes evidence and it keeps you audit ready every day. Without the maintenance, every cycle really feels like you're starting from scratch. And so oftentimes when I hear people talking about the high costs associated with high trust, I realize that these organizations are not thinking about high trust the way that I believe it was intended, which is a comprehensive program and a tool to drive business outcomes. When you're running your high trust certification as a program, it's still going to be hard. I'm not going to lie, but it's going to be much harder than without a plan. You'll also be focused on maintaining controls and sustaining controls rather than discovery and celebration. So you have two paths forward once you've received your certification. You can let all of your hard work be for naught. If you neglect your program, you will have control gaps again, you will have stale evidence, and you'll have potential missed audits the next time around. And for most certifications, that next time around is less than 12 months away. What if you didn't have to scramble again? Many organizations, as I think about the three levels of maturity here, many organizations land in survival. They scramble, they certify, and they call it a win. The next step is keeping the lights on, but with a lot fewer fire drills. And then ultimately strategy. Strategy is the nirvana in my mind. This is where high trust informs real risk decisions and business alignment. And my goal today is to help push you from survival towards stability and hopefully getting you on the path to strategy. Because when you hit strategy, you're doing things like surfacing your CSF control health metrics, those green, amber, red metrics. You're surfacing those in an executive dashboard to inform budget decisions and to demonstrate the security ROI. You're able to leverage your annual certification and control testing evidence to potentially negotiate a lower cyber insurance rate. This is very expensive now, and costs continue to go up. But in doing this, you're translating your security maturity into direct cost savings to your organizations. We feature high trust status and continuing monitoring status in our proposals. Give yourself a competitive edge by showing your prospects that you are treating security as an ongoing program, not just a checkbox. You can measure the time saved on an audit prep and funnel those hours into value-based project like dev test automation or threat hunting or incident response training. You can also present high trust status, and we've done this quite a bit. We have presented high trust status to satisfy multiple standards, including HIPAA or ISO in one stroke because of the very nice way that the high trust CSF crosswalks all of these other standards. And finally, we've also been able to tie in individual control owners' performance against SLAs into our department's OKRs, which embeds that security stewardship into our day-to-day operations, and it really boosts that team engagement. So how do you get there, right? And so I want to start by looking at some of the tools that you may already own, right? Use what you've got. I mean, is seriously here. If you have an expensive GRC tool, fabulous. Let's use that. But if you don't, even just Outlook for recurring reminders, Excel for a control register, and OneDrive as a centralized for centralized documents, that works beautifully. And I've built robust, sustainable programs using tools on this slide. Again, the calendar appointments just to kick off the periodic check-ins, and keeping all of the policies and the procedures and the evidence centrally located. This can be modeled with other work item tracking systems like Atlassian's Confluence and Jira. The more advanced the tools are, the easier some of that integration is in pulling some of that data together. But this combination really took us from scramble mode to stability in just 3 short months. And what this looked like, before we get into the system, I'm going to let the audience here marvel at my crazy Canvas skills. This is something that I've mocked up. I'm not able to show the real page, but the intent is the same here. At the heart of sustainability is a single control record for each scoped item. And the reason why this one-page control record is such a game changer for certifications, when we completed our first high trust R2, we were drowning in spreadsheets. We had Word docs everywhere. We had an ocean of email threads. And when the assessors arrived, they spent days just piecing together who owned what, where the procedures lived, where was the evidence provided. It felt like total chaos, and it was a real hit to not only our confidence, but I suspect also a bit of a hit to the confidence of the assessor. But for the second R2 assessment, we flipped the script, and for every scope control, we built a single snapshot that looked very much like this. It included a control ID and a description so nobody had to guess what we were talking about. It included a policy link and a procedure link so that the assessor could click straight through to the source docs. It included an evidence description so everybody knows exactly what screenshots or logs to pull. Audit frequencies was included just so that it's so crystal clear when checks are due. And then finally, a running history of the dates and outcomes and notes as it relates to each audit. So why does this work? Because it turns every control from a buried puzzle into a transparent, clickable record. You eliminate question after question, you reduce follow-up requests, and you end up building assessor confidence. And more importantly, it frees you to focus on the right gap instead of firefighting documentation. That's why a lean tactical system isn't just a nice to have. I believe it is the key to a smooth, low stress certification every single cycle. And so that one document becomes your single pane of glass for every control. If you've got a big fancy GRC system, you probably already have something like this. Use it, build it out, right? This approach I have found delights assessors because they see crisp ownership, they see time-stamped artifacts, and they see the full audit trails. My internal teams loved it too because there was no more 11th hour scrambles. Everyone knows what they're doing each check, and the decisions flow from real risk data. We've had assessors tell us that they'd never seen such crisp artifacts put together in in a single audit ready package for them. And beyond that, our internal teams spend at least 50% less time preparing before the audit because all of this work, was spread out throughout the year. So I want to leave here just with this closing thought. The certification is base camp, right? If we really lean into this mountain climbing the mountain metaphor, the confetti marks the base camp. The real climb is sustaining the controls, refreshing the evidence, and really living your security program every single day. And so if you leave here and you really only do three things, I encourage you to make them these. One, catalog your controls. Two, if you have a control that has a defined period inside of your catalog, these are going to be controls that read like every 90 days, once per year, annually. That's your heartbeat. You need to put those on a calendar. And then when they're done, log them. And those three actions alone will catapult you towards stability and set you well on your path towards strategy. So again, there's a QR code here that you can use to find me on LinkedIn if you want to continue the discussion. My intent here was to pause now and really open this up to a free-form discussion for the rest of the group.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and I think you're preaching to kind of the same analogies that we use a lot. I know our
Yeah.
audit Sherpa is something that we've coined a couple of different times to be that because we're usually in that role of, getting people up to, the mountain and the success. Um, and I know we've talked about different ways to implement kind of that control by control log that you were talking about. And I do,
Yeah.
it's funny because I think about that and I'm like, yeah, there's so many organizations that don't necessarily have a big fancy GRC system. But to Donna's point, if they're a Microsoft shop, you've got SharePoint.
You
So
got it.
put a form in for SharePoint. I think the only thing I would add to what you had on that slide would be that you mark your control owners just so that it's
Hmm.
easier to go back and say, okay, person A, you have these 10 things that I'm going to need that I, got from you last time. And then when that person moves to something else, it's very easy to collect everything that was assigned to them and say, okay, you're the replacement for person A. So now this is your responsibility. And by the way, this is exactly what they did, which is a GRC tool, so we're kind of
Hmm.
building our own custom GRC
Yes.
tools. There
Right.
also are different assessors and readiness assessors that provide this type of a system that, can kind of have that after sustainability. But I really wanted to kind of get everybody's thoughts about what we talked about last week with the continuous assurance, which is
Mhm.
a step beyond continuous monitoring, but kind of having HITRUST kind of falling into the same kind of pattern where you won't know what controls they're going to ask you for on a quarterly basis, on a regular basis, but they're going to continually assess as opposed to it being an interim assessment or a point in time or a whole reassessment a year from now or 2 years from now. And so
Yeah.
kind of how this mindset, I think, is what is going to be needed no matter who you are and what certification you go for, because that's kind of where HITRUST is moving. So it's not climb the mountain, forget about it, get ready to climb the mountain, climb it, forget about it. It kind of levels it out a little bit more.
I couldn't agree with you more, Susan, on all those points. Um, I really like the idea of the ongoing monitoring, the continuous assurance. And one of the ways that we had started at looking at addressing that, because that's really important to us too. Because again, we were really looking at high trust and using that to inform business outcomes as it relates to our security program. And in that regard, we wanted to take this to the next level and not necessarily having an individual go out and collect that most recent scan report or collect the most recent AV signature update logs. What we wanted to build out is this idea of a compliance as code framework where we can automate our checks so that they can occur on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a weekly, whatever cadence we desire. We're able to very quickly leverage real live data to bring that in and give us a real comprehensive view of our risk throughout the program. And I think that feeds in very nicely to the continuous monitoring or the continuous assurance, because I think organizations will need to implement something like that to uh, to help satisfy that. Otherwise, it just ends up being very, very unsustainable if individuals are
Mhm.
having to go through, every time there's a request for a control update to provide new evidence, right? We
Yeah.
we really need to look at how can we leverage the technology to help with this.
Yeah, and I, from my perspective, I was really excited to hear that High Trust is not only going to be offering the continuous assurance, but also uh, that it's actually coming really soon. So it's coming in Q1 2026, according to what Ryan shared with us
Wow.
last week. And the timing, I think, is really important because not only are people looking for how can we stop this huge mountain of effort in this every 2 years for an R2 or every
Mhm.
year for an E1 or an I1, but how can we also keep pace with the increased velocity that AI brings to our businesses.
Right.
So we're now looking at AI. There's floods of new, code and everything else. And people, I went to an ISSA conference a couple of weeks ago, and people said,
Mhm.
"Well, how can we get leadership to let us hire more security people?" And I'm thinking that feels like the slightly wrong approach to this.
Right.
It just it isn't quite looking at the real newness to the landscape and instead is trying to solve it with an old solution. And I think part of
Yeah.
this, the changing landscape is we need to be, for as consistent as this new velocity is, we need to be looking at how we can consistently ensure that our controls are there, that they're being reviewed on a more regular basis in a fundamentally different way, not just that the internal person puts some meeting notes out there every quarter, which is a good start because then at least you're not having to go back and look for those in emails, but you need to really make sure that those fundamental internal controls are there and they are monitored by people who are going, oh, okay, right, well, that looks that's red, so that's obviously bad. But even, here are things that are going into an orange or, look like they're not quite
Mhm.
right on the results and can immediately take action. It's not waiting until that next assessment period or anything, which ideally is what it's supposed to be anyway. But it's hard to make sure that all of those checks and balances are in place without something like this or a continuous assurance program.
Yeah. I think you're spot on there, Donna, and I really I appreciate you bringing up the hiring discussion because I will say I started that way as I was trying to build my security program. I was trying to figure out how do I convince my organization to fund extra FTEs. And what I learned is that's not what I need to convince the organization of. I need to convince the organization of the risk that they're facing. Because if I'm able to do that, they'll give me what I need to close that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do like the layout that you've used here, and it actually looks very similar to some summary sheets that I've seen different clients use. One of the things that I would propose is in line with what Sue said, having an owner, but how I've implemented it in the past on an internal basis was having that connected to the list of users and roles so that you can coordinate
Yes.
like a senior, who's the executive oversight on it, who's the role associated, and then just have the system automatically plug and play the name. That way, as the name changes or whatever, you don't have to get to the
Yes.
next point of review and try and figure out, well, who owned it last time?
Yes.
And how is that shaped? Because if this is part of it and you know who the leadership person is over it, then it is a little easier for consideration when there are organizational restructures. And
Right.
I know organizations never restructure because why would
Never.
they do that? But it's just getting that little step ahead to go, right, well, here's how it was aligned last time. And so, then you've at least got a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah, Donna, Susan, both excellent feedback on that. I was putting together this particular graphic from memory. We did have document owners, and it was
That's
a
great.
role for exactly the reasons that you described. Because
Mhm.
at that time we were growing and evolving as a security and a compliance organization. And so
Sure.
we knew very quickly that people would be there would be some flux in there. And so we wanted to make sure to assign roles to it so that when somebody stepped into a new role, they were automatically fed in the work items that needed to be completed to satisfy and keep this control dashboard up to date.
Sure. I'm curious, with regards to policies and procedures, did you have reciprocal links? So if you had a link from here into policy documents or procedures, did you have reciprocal links? I had done them myself at one point, and I was just curious whether or not, because they were, I will say, without hesitation, they were cumbersome to maintain.
Oh, I bet.
Um,
Yeah.
and that was before the CVIDs, so it was a little more manual.
Yeah.
But I felt it was important because then if somebody wanted to change something, they could click and figure out what the control was that was associated with that content before they went and just changed the policy or procedure in a way that was going to leave us in an uncomfortable position. But I'm just curious about whether or not you did that or found it useful or
We
what the.
so one of the it was an idea that
Mhm.
we had begun exploring towards the end of my time there. We maintained all of our policy documents inside of a GitHub repository, which is
Mhm.
I mean, it's interesting. I think if as you think about that, especially from a technology perspective, because it satisfies all of the revision control, the policy review checkpoints, et cetera, because we use pull requests and so on to modify the language. But what I really hope to do as the next evolution of that is to anchor these individual control IDs in the policy documents, so that we
Hmm.
could have exactly what you described, and to make it
Hmm.
just that much easier for our assessor. Because at that,
Hmm.
if we tag our policy language that way, it's very clear. We can say 1142.09M1 is satisfied right here, and they
Hmm.
can look through that. That entire section is contained, and check that off and move on to the next one. Our
Sure.
whole objective with building this out was not only to make it easier for ourselves, it was easier to make it easier for our assessors, because if we make it easier for them, maybe we pay them a
Hmm.
little bit less.
Or at least they go in with the rose-colored glasses, which is
Yes.
always what you want your assessor to be wearing. It's,
Yes.
you want to have that really good, positive relationship with your assessor.
Yeah. And we loved our assessors.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things I think where it was kind of implied in the movement that you had from the maturity, from just kind of I barely got there to um, the stability and especially into the strategy, is having an executive oversight to kind of mandate that this is the way to go. Because there's so many pieces. People will talk about, well, the operations team doesn't think the compliance team is really secure. They're not information security because they're in compliance. And so I think there's a need there to be able to say, hey, this is where HITRUST is going. This is where we're going to go as a company, so that you do get access to those dashboards, to those reports, or whatever it is that you need to do. And you can kind of sell it to the operations teams as, look, this is that whole audit fatigue that you're tired of me asking you every year, every quarter for a network diagram or a data flow diagram. Well, somebody's got to be asking you for that in your business. And so therefore, this is how it's going to be asked from now on. But you as a compliance person can't typically bridge that gap. You're going to need the executive level to say, yes, we buy into this. This is the way. And kind of what we've always talked about with HITRUST Secrets is, HITRUST isn't just a compliance framework. I kind of more look at it, I'm kind of evolving to take a look at it as a governance framework. And this is the
Mhm.
way this company will be run, and we will follow this HITRUST framework. And so I think that's an important distinction, or thing to call out in this, to say, look, you're not going to be able to, as the person that submitted that HITRUST certification and are celebrating, you're not going to be able to necessarily do this without getting others involved and also speaking this language, because this is a huge leap in a lot of cases for a culture, even within the information security team at a company.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Susan. I think the executive support of this is paramount, and I think thankfully I was able to garner that early on our journey, and then towards the end of my time, I was the executive leadership there, but it is absolutely imperative that people understand the why, right? And that is the executive team's responsibility. We're moving forward with this, and here are the reasons why. And it may be a business differentiator. It may be any of these strategy things that we had talked about. Looking at a certification that cuts across multiple standards, or looking to reduce insurance premium rates, or to provide a security ROI metrics to the board. When people understand why they're doing something, the solutions that they come up with are so creative. Um, and that's where it's our responsibility as leaders in this effort to make sure that not only are we communicating up regarding the reasons why we need to do this, but we're also, with executive leadership support, that we're also communicating out and down about why this is important, and really leaning into having people help build this out. And
Mhm.
towards the end of my time, I can't tell you how many security related conversations I would have with individuals at my organization because of that, because they understood what we were trying to do from the executive level all the way down to the individual contributor.
Yeah. And understanding those benefits is crucial not only to getting support for the program, but to really making sure that everybody across the organization is not only supportive, but talking about the benefits of it in every aspect. So one of the things that I was surprised at when I was doing risk evaluations across the business, it was part of the annual risk review. It was a little archaic, but there we go. The sales team listed HITRUST as one of the key differentiators in their sales cycle. And I was maybe a little more surprised than I should have been that they knew what it was. I mean, I did send the information through, but it was listed as top for a differentiator. The company didn't, the products that were being sold, the solutions that were being sold weren't necessarily entirely unique. While you could say certain components were unique, there were other options available on the marketplace. But really having the sales team behind that HITRUST certification to say this is a key differentiator for our company and for our products, and we can talk to our customers about it. And I even had a point where the leadership team, you have to get different team members to get behind presentations, and this was pre-COVID, so there were lots of challenges and people flying everywhere, and there was always the expense of going to conference and presenting, and it was actually the head of sales who was supportive and was happy for me to go and talk about some of the things that we were doing with HITRUST. And the finance and operations folks were a little bit, well, do we need to say that? I mean, that's not our business. That's not our main core business. And they said, yes, but this is where all of the tech leads and the security leads from our customers are getting their information, and aligning that brand with something as strong as HITRUST and all the security that goes with it. So it's driving the benefits through every aspect of the business and making it everybody's kind of top priority to make sure it's still there and continues. Is It also makes life easier.
Yeah, that what you described there. I mean, sounds similar to discussions. I'm starting to wonder if maybe if we might be talking about the same organization here. Um,
You never know.
I'm confident that we're not, but uh, um, it we talked about making sure that that we're communicating the why. Why are we doing this? And for every department, that why is going to be different, right? And so to your point, Donna, when we were looking to get our company on board with this, I would have different conversations with different department heads. My conversation with the head of sales was, hey, dude, our sales cycles in healthcare, they're 18 to 24 months long. What do you think? What would you say if I could help you lop 3 months off of that for security reviews? And we can instead lean into a HITRUST assessment to help provide that assurance. That gets somebody's attention, right? We're not just implementing new security controls to implement new security controls, right? We're tying those things to specific business outcomes for a sales team, for a board, for a finance department, right? How this is positioned is going to be different for each group. And our work is really finding out how to message that effectively to make sure that those people are coming along.
All right, so I think we've talked about, we've gotten to the why. Now kind of bringing it down to the how. If you've got an R2, you're looking at least 250, 300 controls. You're not going to be able to do this all at the same time. So what do you prioritize first? Is it the things that are a point in time, like once a year I'm going to need to do this? Do you look at pulling in the things that are monthly to just kind of give people an idea of, hey, this is a time saver because this is now automated and it pulls it in and I don't have to go talk to those auditors. How do you break it down to say, okay, here's the first phase that we're going to do to get to this strategy stage?
Susan, great question. And in my mind, again, it's important that we document all of the controls, right? And so we have that initial register, that initial register of controls, and that can be very easily pulled from the validated assessment report. My thoughts are the next items to tackle there are the ones that have some sort of time frames associated with it. Again, every 30 days, once a year, once a month, every week. Those things become immediately actionable because we can implement in Outlook or in a GRC tool or in Jira or whatever system you have access to, you're able to make sure that those are surfaced at the appropriate point in time. Because that right there will eliminate a lot of those gaps if they're being surfaced and you're doing them and you're logging them. I think the next step beyond that is going to be identifying those controls that you can automate very easily. Big expensive GRC systems, they have integrations to pull data in from various sources. If you're just starting with Outlook or Excel, you're not going to have that. Um, but if there is a way that you can bring some of these things in on a periodic basis, um, that would be the next piece that I would cover. And once you've gotten through those two, you have a set of controls that are remaining that we either need to continue implementing as they have been, or identify some other ways that we might be able to satisfy that control. But the quick wins are going to be, in my mind, to automate or to calendar those controls that have specific intervals.
Yeah, agreed. Because otherwise you're going back in and saying, okay, try to find that email that was 3 months ago or 6 months ago, as opposed to, hey, by the way, next week you're on track to have your quarterly review of user access done,
Right.
correct? And then you can follow up. So yeah, project management doesn't go away after the project is done. It sustains on for the entire life cycle of your organization as far as you're wanting to stay HITRUST certified.
Right.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Oh,
have a
go ahead, Laura.
question for you, Matt. So your lovely diagram there where you actually outlined the control with what you were providing as evidence and the tool links to your policies and such. What I found, and I want to just preface by saying I haven't seen an R2 that is that low in numbers. Donna can attest that ours was much larger than that. But my question is on this diagram here, right? A lot of the baseline IDs, what I'm looking at kind of maps to like a baseline ID for your control view to a what would I call it? Like a control reference grouping, right? So sometimes there's a grouping and it might have 5 actual controls underneath it. So did you map it that way or did you actually map it at the baseline ID? Does that make sense
Um,
to my question?
yes,
Okay.
yes. So when you say just to make sure that we're speaking about the same thing, Laura, I think when you're talking about the baseline ID
Yep.
in the high trust parlance, it's the control objective, right? Like 09M controls against malicious code, as opposed,
Yes.
or are you thinking at the domain level?
So like 10.a security requirement and analysis and specification, right?
Right,
Or
and it has a
yeah,
half a dozen separate
right.
controls underneath it.
Correct.
We had developed our documentation at that higher level,
Okay.
But we were in the process of making it more granular because we found that some of these controls, some of these control objectives, they made pages that were way too long, and they had various jumping off points for different procedures based on which aspect of that control objective you were trying to satisfy. And so this view here that I've provided is the way that I would do it if I were to build it again from
Okay.
scratch, which is at the individual control level. The control objective is a subhead underneath it. So you
Yep.
still have that traceability up. You could also, if you wanted to, include a domain in here.
Mhm.
And that gives you the ability to pivot some of that data into giving you some different views and how you stand up against um, it's the training and education domain or the controls against malicious code domain. So
Okay.
I find that again, if I were to do it over, I'd start this way
Okay.
because it's much more specific.
Right. Well, what I appreciate is the fact that it allows you to put in there what you've provided for evidence. And so if next year you don't do as well in that section, you might realize something else that would help bring your score up, right? To get you. So it's not like cap related or something, right? So
Right.
what I'm trying to do, and I'm new to this whole world, is figure out an easy way to go through the process so that if John leaves tomorrow, I know what John provided next year and I'm not recreating the wheel year over
Right.
year.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and the importance of this view here is, Laura, to make sure that it's up to date.
Yep.
Again, I mentioned our assessors. We love them, and they would give us specific feedback on evidence. And so when we get that feedback, what's the first thing that we do? We come in
Go put
here
it
and we
in there.
update this. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it's not enough to just build this once
Yep.
and
No,
leave
it's
it.
your tool.
You have to care and feed it.
Yep. Yep. Nope. That makes sense.
Hey, I'm
Perfect.
going to chime in real quick because I've been doing a lot of nodding and agreeing with you guys. Oh, this is fantastic, by the way. So, Matt, as you were presenting, I was nodding a lot because I see I'm an external assessor, just full disclosure. I've been doing this for years and years. But a lot of what you said is true, right? The program sometimes can degrade after certification. If one of my customers handed me what you're showing on the screen here, whether it's through a GRC tool or even a spreadsheet, my goodness, that shows that you are on top of things. It shows mastery of a program. There's all kinds, to Matt, to your point, there's all kinds of metadata that you could put in here about control frequency, owner, on and on and on. But what that does to me is it demonstrates that you understand what your in-scope requirements are, number one, you know what the corresponding controls are, number two, and it serves back to really what HITRUST is all about. It's not really about a point in time assessments. It's about
Right.
improving your cyber maturity over the duration of the program. Hopefully that goes on for many, many years. One way to really help with that though is what you're showing on the screen. And when you take that, and especially in organizations with high attrition, that becomes part of your training program for the incoming control owners. And now you've got continuance through training and what the requirements are for proving that a control is in place and operational. So I think that's really, really good. And that, again, also ties back into Sue, your comments. I'm tying a lot of things together here. Your comment about continuous assurance, because that's really what it's all about. When you can demonstrate that you have a good program in place, that you've got control ownership, and you can prove that out over, an assessment cycle. Yes, 90 days is what the validation window is, but the control effectiveness testing goes much further out than just 90 days. So this is helpful in demonstrating that.
Matt, I have one other question for you.
Sure.
Did you or had you thought at all about using this type of a control view to connect controls and or evidence to other types of frameworks? And I say that knowing that I love HITRUST best, but there are a lot of organizations, including ones that I've worked with and for, who need to have more than one certification or security report. And what are the opportunities that you might have explored or use cases for potentially including other control references from different frameworks in here to kind of make this one view rotatable, depending on which framework you were looking at?
Another excellent question, Donna. Uh, I, I think so. I personally have not had that need because whenever we were asked about a SOC 2, our standard response was, here's our HITRUST CSF assessment. Review this and let us know if you have any more questions, and we'd be happy to talk about it. That said, that's not going to work for everybody, right? And so in that case, what I would likely do again is to embed that metadata into this control dashboard, because HITRUST publishes that CSF crosswalk. It allows me to see that this particular control lines up with this control, in ISO, or this FedRAMP control, or so on and so forth. And so in that regard, I would, if I had a FedRAMP obligation here, I would include that.
Mhm.
And that then gives me that ability to pivot on that particular control set to satisfy that for the FedRAMP audit.
Sure. And I could see it being valuable even in cases where maybe the company isn't pursuing the security assessment, but they have clients who are comparing
They
it
need it.
against that security assessment. So interesting times. I appreciate
Yeah.
that everybody still is, there's not that one singular assessment that everybody is working towards, which continues to make life a little
Yeah.
challenging.
Well, where I was at, that one single assessment was the HITRUST CSF, and
Yes.
we
Yes.
were. I do feel that we were pretty fortunate that we were able to lean into that. Um, Again, I think I do think that some of that is because of we were able to provide that report, and when we had follow-up questions, we were able to provide examples like this. And to Andrew's point, this instills confidence, right? It doesn't instill confidence if you're having to send across email threads as evidence, right? Having a dashboard shows that you're taking this seriously, that this means something to you, to your organization, and that security, that compliance isn't just a checkbox for the organization, but it's something that they really internalize and that they live and breathe.
Well, and I also think it's important if you had a system that wasn't maybe included in your HITRUST certification the first time, and now they're looking at it and saying, hey, what would it take for us to be in there? And you can pull any of these that maybe are sampled by system or application, or the, instead of organizational controls, they're the system controls, and you can
Mhm.
basically hand that to them in the format that they're used to from your organization, and just say, here's what it's going to take. You're going to have to do vulnerability scans, pen testing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you're done with that, and you can see the evidence that we used last time with these other systems, so once you can prove those things to us, then we can add you to the scope of the next HITRUST assessment that we're doing.
Mhm.
And I think that would go a long way as well as having it for samples, so that many different controls are using active employees and active contractors as their sample. And it's very helpful to ask your HR people, okay, here's the list I'm going to need from you of active employees. And once you give me that, here's the sample of the evidence that I'm going to need for the 25 or 50 people that we do select out of here, so that they understand, oh, you're going to look for background checks, you're going to look for whatever training records and whatever it is. So it's nice to be able to kind of have it in a couple of different ways, more so
Yeah.
than what the user interface for the MyCSF portal allows, because it's a little cumbersome pulling that information out. But if you've got it here in more of a relational database kind of situation, then you can kind of move it the way you want it to and meet them where they're comfortable. within the organization.
You can also then group things by owner or
Yes.
by leadership team members so that when you're going to ask HR for various types of records that are coming out of personnel, it's not piecemeal. It's not, oh, okay, great, thanks for those training. Now can I have all the background checks for the same number of for the same exact employees, right?
Right.
It's easier if you got to go down there, or sift through personnel files and records and things. If you know consistently, oh, okay, here are all the different things that I need for this,
Right. Once I pick
individual,
these employees, here's
and
the
go get them.
5 artifacts that I'm
Yeah.
going to require from them. So that, to your point, they can say, well, I don't do background checks, but I do training records. So now I know to engage so and so on the background
Yeah.
check, so that you, as the compliance facilitator, are not going, okay, now who do I have to ask for this and who do I have to ask for that? Or they get that
Yeah.
fatigue of, oh, you're coming back again,
Not you.
It's exhausting for
Yes.
everybody.
Yeah.
Well,
All
thanks.
right.
This
I
has
think
been very helpful. We're at the top of the hour, so if you
Oh,
can stay
wow.
on, by all means, we'll stay on, but I wanted to be sensitive to everybody's time.
sure. I've got to jump, so I'm gonna leave
Perfect.
everybody here. Thanks so much for
All right.
joining, Matt. Thank you very much for your presentation today. It was great.
Thank you. Thanks, Donna, for having me. It was great to be here.
So, Laura, Andrew, do you have any other questions, either for Matt or just kind of general high trust questions?
I'm all good, but I
Okay,
appreciate this. This was very, very helpful. Thank you.
great.
Thanks,
And we
Laura.
will record it and we'll put it out on YouTube. So we'll make sure that everybody's aware that it's out when it's out there. It should take probably another day or two to get that out there.
All
Perfect.
right.
All
Yeah, ditto
right.
for
Thank
me,
Well,
you.
Beth. No
thank you.
question.
And we're
Good
here
stuff.
every Thursday. So join us again if your schedule permits.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, Susan.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
See you, Laura. See you, Andrew.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next High Trust Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your high trust journey.